Well, hold on. I want to give an answer.
All right.
Luke, probably not. Boog, probably not. If there's one guy,
Yes.
and Debo, I know you're probably not listening, but I mean this in a loving way. If there's one guy that might stir it up, it would be Debo, just in terms of like, Debo's got a little bit of that, I want to run through a wall. Like I'm like a motivating factor to him. And I know I wasn't here. Y'all had him in here, right? Mm-hmm. Debo knows how to fire up the troops. So I could see Debo not saying anything controversial in terms of like other teams, but maybe like maybe making a guarantee that this team is going to be better than the projections. But because I feel like he's the type guy that wholeheartedly believes that. He's got a lot of self-confidence.
Well, the funny thing about the Tonka thing is he wasn't even taking a slight at anyone. It was just teams he did not name that were, hey, well, why aren't we included on this list of toughest places you've ever played in or whatever it was. So it can even come about in those kind of ways. It doesn't necessarily have to be a direct shot, but I'd be intrigued to see if anybody can pull anything out of these three guys that could be remotely controversial next week.
Yeah, I'm with you. By the way, where was Georgia on the top 25 toughest places to play in
they were
the game?
In the top 5. I think
top
they were
5?
5th.
That's hanging up in the locker room.
Yeah,
Kirby's made a slideshow.
Why are we not number 1?
Well, you know, that goes next to the 7 and 5 thing.
Yeah,
that doesn't exist.
Nobody's picking them. Everybody thinks they're not going to make a bowl. No, I'm with you. I think Debo would be the one, whether it's something like you said, Wes, or if he's just, I'm not even going to say what I just thought of, but you know, I could see him saying something about violence on the football field or something like that, because that's how he plays and that's who he is, which is awesome.
Yeah.
If you love football, and he does.
He's a little bit old school about it.
He's very old school. People are like, man, that guy just throws his body around and doesn't care, which is awesome.
Yeah.
Everybody loves a linebacker like that.
Well, we'll see what they have to say, as well as Coach Beamer coming up on Monday at Media Days out there in Dallas, and we'll react to that coming up next Tuesday. Yesterday, we finally learned who was going to be replacing Taylor Edwards as South Carolina's Director of Player Personnel and Recruiting. We'll dive into that coming up. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs here on the game.
All right, I just hope they have Firehouse Subs at SEC Media Days. I know no matter where you are in the Midlands, there is a Firehouse Subs near you. Almost lunchtime. It is time to order your Firehouse Subs for the day. Best way, most efficient way to do that. Got 2 ways for you. FirehouseSubs.com, or, in my opinion, even more efficient, download the Firehouse Subs app. Hopefully, at this point, you all already have. If you haven't, hit the App Store, hit whatever the store is on Google, and download the Firehouse Subs app, and then open it up, hit the Rapid Rescue to go, avoid the wait, order online. One of the best parts about it, other than the awesome subs, is that you're going to get points every single time you order. You can then trade those points in at a later date for free food. Try my favorite, number 1 on my power rankings right now is the brisket, add bacon. But whatever you like, they got something for you at Firehouse Subs. FirehouseSubs.com and the Firehouse Subs app. Order right now.
Welcome back in Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler West and Chris along with you here on the game. It's only a couple days ago where we learned that Taylor Edwards would not be returning in his role as the Director of Player Personnel and Recruiting for the South Carolina football team. It didn't take long for South Carolina to find his replacement as Darren, is it Usher? Is it pronounced Usher? Do we have a confirmation on that?
Uche, nah, it's Usher.
Darren Usher coming over from Oregon, an actual former alum himself of the University of South Carolina, going to be sliding into this role. And we've talked about this.
Some could say he still is an alum.
That's true.
At one time.
Sorry.
One time alumnus.
One-time alumnus, yes.
Sorry, man.
You know what I meant. But anyway, we talked about this a little bit earlier on this morning. Guy's got a very impressive resume. Bounced around to a couple of notable institutions, most recently coming over from Oregon and, hopefully getting South Carolina or continuing on South Carolina's trend of recruiting well for the past couple of years under Coach Beamer.
Yeah, and I think this obviously was interesting timing in having to go out and get someone. Now, I would also say in terms of timing, this maybe was the best time to actually do it because there's really no perfect time to do it. So the fact that you do have a dead period right now, you didn't have prospects on campus, but there's going to be kind of a little bit, I would say, of a transition to getting kind of up to speed on the recruiting board. And obviously, with Oregon, they have a recruiting board, but it's a little bit different footprint than what South Carolina likely has. But, Chris, I know you've been gathering some information on just what he brings to the table. Obviously, as an alum, there's going to be quite a great deal of just, I think, want to here to get the job done. Like, there's something special about being able to come back to the school you went to. And one thing that's been mentioned to me as well, and I'll let you provide some more details, but just that he is a true recruiter. Mm-hmm. And that actually doesn't always play. Sometimes that position is a little bit more of like logistics and planning and stuff like that, whereas some guys, and this was a strength of Taylor Edwards as well, I think, is actually getting down in there and building relationships and recruiting and being a part of that and not just putting that on the actual coaches. So that's one thing I've picked up so far is that he is going to be all about it in terms of building those relationships and doing some recruiting himself, not just running the recruiting department.
Yeah, those are, both of those things that you mentioned, I think, are things that I've heard are strengths, whether you look at, you need in your recruiting department, your personnel department, you need organizational skills from people. You need a top down, you need a really strong organization because when you're running a recruiting operation, there's a lot to it. And we've seen a lot of programs. Alabama was like the big first one years ago under Saban where they built this massive army. That was at the beginning of the social media era becoming very, very important in recruiting. And that was kind of modeled out by a bunch of really every other school. If you're a major school, you've got some version of it. Some people just have it even more than others. They have it even more built out. And, one of the places the place that Usher is coming from in Oregon, if you go, just go to their staff directory. They have a team. They have an army, and he's a cog in that. This was a guy that was hired by Chip Kelly at UCLA before Chip left to go to Ohio State. He was hired there to be basically the GM, and so he, was building out an organization, building out a team there, and then obviously there was a coaching change. He went back to Oregon. So he's seen that modeled, and from what I've heard, he, has some good ideas on that front and has some strengths in terms of being able to put pieces together and organize people. But I think the part that you mentioned, Wes, is also very, very important. And it is something that Taylor Edwards is good at. You can't just have your head coach and your assistant coaches, and that's it in the recruiting process nowadays. It has to be all of the other people that are on your staff, whether it's, the assistants that really nobody aside from guys like me and Wes who cover the program every day. A lot of people don't even know who those people are. But they're critically important because they're hosting recruits, they're talking to recruits, they're helping out the coaches with the organization and things like that. But you need even the head, the player personnel director, the director of recruiting, whatever you call that person, they need to be adept at recruiting too. And we've heard several anecdotes of Darren Usher being personally involved in recruitments and having success on that front. And I think that's a not just a bonus. I think it's something, frankly, you need nowadays.
So I think everybody kind of has a general sense of what this job is, but more specifically, what is a Darren Usher going to be doing on a day-to-day basis with this new job at South Carolina?
Yeah, and like Chris said, it can be different at different schools, and some schools kind of split it up a little bit more. And but basically, so you look at his title, Director of Player Personnel and Recruiting. So a lot of it is organizational, like making sure that everything is covered, and that could be from a more broad standpoint of who's got this territory, who's got that territory. It is so every coach has to take care of their own room at the end of the day, but most of the coaches have a guy in the recruiting department who is more tied to them as well and is going to help them kind of manage that room and manage different prospects as well. But ultimately, if you're the DPP, your job is to make sure that everybody underneath you is handling all those things while coming up with a big picture plan. Now, Chris, you would say at the end of the day, that's also on the head coach, but I think that the head coach has enough on their plate as well. So they have to be able to manage all the recruiting, and that could be getting down into the day-to-day of, hey, if this is a time when coaches are on the road, all right, today the OC is at this school, the DC is that school, and here are the 5 schools that coach is going to be at today. But the big picture of that scheduling may be, all right, at the end of this period, have our coaches stop by every single school that they needed to. Like, you don't want to get to the end of that window and then be like, well, we screwed up the scheduling. We didn't make it to this school, and they have a 4-star guy for the next class. And so there really is a ton that goes into it. And some of that goes into, all right, how many guys on your total roster out of the 85, how many scholarship quarterbacks are you going to have? How many scholarship running backs? How many scholarship receivers? On and on and on. Then that sort of, if you dive deeper and deeper, okay, how many are we taking this class? Okay, within this class, how many of them are going to be transfers? How many are going to be high school guys? Going even deeper than that, all right, nowadays, as NIL gets more and more in-house, there's going to be an aspect of knowing, which guy's getting more NIL resources, frankly, within the rules.
Yeah, and I think all those things that you just mentioned as well, those all should not be taken on by just one person in the recruiting department. So I think the head of this department, which Darren Usher will be, is someone who should be able to, like I said earlier, put the pieces together, be able to delegate all these different tasks to people who are able to effectively do those jobs, to empower the people to, the people under you to be able to run certain aspects of the program. And, frankly, I think South Carolina could make some manpower improvements in terms of the amount of people that they're putting in the recruiting department because, again, you may not want to. You may say, "Well, we don't need to chase Oregon because they got Nike money and Phil Knight." I get that, but I'm not talking about necessarily just cold hard cash. I'm talking about investing in manpower and investing in personnel and in people. That's what really is a huge part of recruiting. And so, if you look at some other programs like in Oregon, for example, even some other schools in the SEC, they have a lot of manpower in their recruiting department. And so if you're South Carolina and you're trying to make a move up in the SEC in the pecking order, and SEC is getting even tougher, as we know, starting this year, you can't say, hey, let's go compete with Georgia and, schools like Oregon and Clemson, but let's do it, on a shoestring budget. Not that that's what South Carolina is doing, but you don't want to be in that position. I think you want to be able to look, what can we do to completely maximize the amount of resources we're devoting to NIL, to the amount of people that we have in our department, and I think that's what you need to do. Usher is a guy he's a younger guy. I think he understands the landscape. He's been at some of these big programs. Oregon's a great example. I think that experience will serve him very, very well. And I think he's going to bring some new ideas to the program as well.
What, Chris, do you think? And I know we got to hit the break here in a second. So Oregon right now, they have a director of player personnel and a director of recruiting strategy, split into two. Is player personnel, you think, more eval and stuff like that, whereas recruiting strategy is more the logistics of actually, okay, how are we going to recruit these guys?
How are we going to amass talent? Yes, I think so. And that's how a lot of programs have it split. So do we see something like that here? Do we see more manpower hired? Maybe so. Maybe so.
Come back and wrap up today's edition of the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs here on the game. Welcome back in. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler out of West Mitchell. Chris Clark along with you for a few more minutes. As we talked about at the top of the show, Media Day coming up next week. Found out who the player representatives for South Carolina are going to be. And at the end of next week, we're going to get the media poll where all the media there in Dallas get their opportunity to cast their votes for who they think are going to be in what respective spots in the SEC. Now 1 through 16 instead of being split up in divisions as it has been in years past. Athlon Sports actually put out their own SEC projected finishing order the other day. South Carolina, not too favorable in their eyes. 13th out of 16 teams, according to Athlon Sports.
Are we shocked, though?
Not at all.
I think so much of this stuff is reactionary,
Sure.
in my opinion. Like, if you're going to put out one of these lists, unless you're just name brand, blue blood, or you're like a Missouri, where you had that just quote unquote breakout year last year, and then had a great bowl game. Like you're kind of all these lists are made up of the big name blue bloods and kind of the flashy sort of spoiler team. This year, I would say that's what Missouri and Ole Miss are like the flashy non-blue blood upstart type programs in the league. If you're South Carolina and you go 5-7 last year, there's they could have brought in the best transfer class in the history of college football, and I don't know if they would be getting too much buzz going into this year. Generally, everything in college athletics when it comes to the media is based on what did you see last year. And if you're South Carolina, frankly, it's fair. Like it's fair for them to put you there. Mm-hmm. You add 2 teams to the mix, and guess what? You didn't add, SMU. You didn't add Cal. You added Oklahoma and Texas, who guess what are 2 of the biggest brands in college football history as well. So, at this point, throw it on the wall in the locker room, use it as motivation, but you can't really be too mad about being put there.
Well, and I think the most fair thing to do is if you're saying, oh, that's insane. And to your point earlier, Wes, a lot of people are kind of in wait-and-see mode or in a frustration mode. So I don't even know if a lot of people are even looking at this. I might be building a straw man. There's not a lot of people looking at this going, that's crazy, that's too low. But it might be insulting in some regard. But, go through the list and name, based on what we know right now, name the schools that you would have behind South Carolina,
I think you can make an argument that can maybe be an 11th.
Yes.
Put them ahead of Florida and Kentucky, which,
yes.
And I talked about this a while back. I think when you talk about next week's media poll specifically, Carolina's going to be somewhere between 10th and 13th. So that kind of falls right in that range. And again, you're going to get to play Kentucky in week number 2 this year. Not going to see Florida. Florida obviously has a really tough schedule. That, for this list at least, is probably about where I think as high as Carolina could go is maybe 11th.
Yeah, those seem to be kind of like Kentucky's a swing game on this schedule. And so it's kind of that range is kind of your range for South Carolina. I don't think you put them at the bottom where Vanderbilt is, and Mississippi State's 15th with a lot of changes, a lot of personnel defections. We know Sam Pittman's on the hot seat at Arkansas. I don't think it's unfair to have South Carolina here. They could certainly end up outplaying from a wins and losses standpoint. They could end up outplaying where they are right now. But I think there's really a few spots you could haggle with here.
Well, I also think it's important to say that there's a line between 13th, 14th, or 13th, and then 14th through 16th with Arkansas, Mississippi State, and Vanderbilt, because those are 3 teams that nobody's expecting really anything out of this year. We don't know if Sam Pittman's going to last the season. Mississippi State's in complete rebuild mode with Jeff Lebby. Vanderbilt's Vanderbilt. So nobody's really expecting a lot out of those teams. I'm not saying South Carolina is expected to be an 8 or 9 win team by a lot of people, but I think most people would say that's a team that's going to be in the mix to maybe get back to a bowl game this year. So I think there's a line between where Carolina is and the teams below them on what level of expectations are.
Yeah, and I think I was trying to find the exact at the same point last year projection for the SEC from Athlon. One thing I found from Athlon, this was like right before the season, projection of Missouri. They have Missouri 6th in the East last year, ahead of only Vandy, and saying projected to go 6-6 overall. So Missouri is now the darling based on what they did last year, and they returned a lot of guys, and it's probably fair. But this time last year, maybe some people were projecting it. I don't remember seeing that they were going to be the surprise team in the SEC. And frankly, to start the year, like they had some close wins that wouldn't have you projecting they would finish the way they did. So the beauty is we get to play the games.
Right.
No matter how much you think it's all decided, every single year there will be a team on these lists that completely underperforms where we think they should be, and there will be a team that wins a couple of close games, gets some momentum, and then outperforms what we expect. If you're a Gamecock fan, you're hoping you're obviously the latter.
Absolutely, and we'll see what happens again next week with SEC Media Days out there in Dallas, South Carolina. Part of kicking things off on Monday, we hear from Beamer, we'll hear from the players, and react to that as the week goes along, and then hear from everybody else throughout the course of the rest of the week as we get closer and closer to start football season. 53 days away until South Carolina and Old Dominion kick things off in week number 1. That'll do it for today's edition of the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Halftime show with Terry Ford coming up next as your Wednesday rolls along here on The Game.
All right, guys, before we turn over the mic, let me tell you about one more great sponsor. It's our friends over at Midlands Home Renovations. Head on over to MidlandsHomeRenovations.com or call them today, 888-979-4919. That's 888-979-4919. If you've been dreaming of that home makeover, but you're not sure where to start, contact them today. They specialize in whole home, kitchen, and bath transformations. It's one of the top-rated general contractors in the Midlands. You can rest assured that your home is being placed in great hands. That could be from modern kitchens to luxurious baths to that sunroom add-on we've all been dreaming of, but you're just never quite sure where to start. They can take your vision and then bring it to life. Call Andrew today or visit MidlandsHomeRenovations.com to see your work and bring your home vision to life. Again, that phone number one more time is 888-979-4919 or MidlandsHomeRenovations.com.